am not a estate agent or realtor in Utah, just in case there was any confusion on that.
All right. Just to let you know, you're back. Well, you've kind of sort of explained, but background is you've did a degree in just straightforward politics. What's the exact degree you did?
Oh, well, my undergrad is just a degree in politics. Then I did a master's actually in nationalism studies. Now doing a PhD in politics, looking at the far right in Europe. So that's the academic background. I've done some work as a political consultant and so on as well.
Yeah. So I guess we're here tonight to talk one of everyone's favorite subjects, politics, which is, it's always greeted by a groan when in just general conversation you bring it up. I suppose we could start. I'm going to ask you some of the really basic questions because I knew once we announced you and once we put trailers up, I knew some of the comments that we would get. And one of the first, and it's always it doesn't matter, why bother? But I suppose basically, why on earth would you get into politics? Would be a good place to start, I think.
Politics isn't, the first thing to bear in mind, politics isn't just elections and voting on what goes on in Parliament. Parliament is everything we do in public life, and it affects almost everything we do. It's almost trite to say, but it's the roads, it's the quality of the air we breathe, it's the quality of the food that we eat, it's schools and hospitals, and the internet and communication. So it matters. What it does is important. It's the way that we basically manage competing interests from different groups, and it's the way we do it in a peaceful way. The history of, well, frankly, the history of this country, the history of this continent, and generally of our species is pretty bloody. Recently, at least around here, we've done pretty good at not having to kill each other when we have differences to resolve. So sometimes it is depressing, sometimes it is boring, sometimes you think the people running the place are idiots, but for all the problems there are with politics at the moment, it's the way we organize our society to make things better for everybody in a peaceful way. So the reason to get involved is it's important, and it's always better than the alternative.
Yeah.
And also, and if I just say, if you don't like the way politics are at the moment, get involved. If you don't like any of the candidates, get involved, find different candidates, stand yourself, get involved in a pressure group, write to your representatives. Don't complain about it and then just sit on your ass.
Yeah, because it's one of the the most shocking things. It's when political discussions start, and I've met quite a few MPs and politicians in general, and everyone always says, "Oh, what are they really like?" And you're not. And I always have to say, well, you're not actually going to believe this, but most of them are really nice folk and very hard-working folk. MPs in particular, I would not envy that job at all.
No, most of them do work, very very long hours. And it's not always a particularly glamorous job. When you're dealing, sorting out Mrs. Migginson's drains, or I don't know, something more serious, somebody who is trying to get rehoused or something like that. It can be hard work. You always don't get the result you want all the time. You don't get it quickly, but it's still worth doing.
Yep. Ziller, have you got anything there? You've been sitting quietly right now.
I'm just listening at the moment. I'll pitch in a bit later.
All right. No problem.
As I was saying earlier, I'm just feeling a little under the weather. So if I go a bit quiet, it's just because I'm feeling a bit woozy.
Okay. Yeah. So and
actually, sorry, just one thing on the turnout thing. I'm guessing a few viewers will be from the States. And Hillary Clinton is looks almost certain to be the Democratic nominee. And lots of people are saying, well, all right, but she's not as progressive as we'd want. Or on the Republican side, a lot of the candidates that seem to be potential are possibly certifiable. Get involved in the process. It's really easy when hardly anyone gets involved. turnout at midterm elections is catastrophically low in the States, and then for other elections, lower still. For council elections in the UK, the turnout is often very low indeed.
It's like a third or something.
So on that order. And remember, if you're to be a councillor, sometimes you need a few hundred votes, sometimes less than 1,000 votes to get elected. So if you're really passionate about it, you can get involved and you can make a real difference.
Yeah, because what you say about the low turnout, you just need to see what happens at the Euro elections.
Yeah.
But all these bizarre and quite frightening parties all seem to get seats in the European Parliament.
Mm.
That's a consequence of a low turnout, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean in the jargon they're called second order elections. So everything that isn't an election for the for the national parliament, possibly sometimes we expect exceptions in Scotland at the moment for Holyrood. People are less likely to vote, more likely to vote for or to take a gamble, and more likely to have a protest vote. Hence why you've seen parties like UKIP and the Greens generally doing better in local elections and in European elections. And in the past, the Lib Dems always did much better in local elections because people thought, well, it doesn't matter. It's not like it's the government.
Yep. I've seen a question come up in the chat room there about internet voting. I think this has been discussed in the UK. Do you think that's a viable path to go along?
I think we may end up going that way, and I think it's a terrible idea. There are so many potential security problems with that unless you can be absolutely certain that the system is, as far as possible, foolproof, that seems like a huge risk to take. And there's two things. There's one is internet voting. Given how with internet voting, I think there's two problems. One is, how do you know the person at the terminal is actually the person it's meant to be? Because if you've got this is something that's been identified with postal voting as a problem as well. It could be anybody who has access to that information. How do you know there's not going to be a man in the middle, person in the middle, to change things in some way? The other thing, and this applies to electronic voting where you go and press a button on a machine, is how sure are you about the counting? Are you sure enough that the system has been set up properly? Given that you can, you could potentially go in with a USB stick and just reprogram it. Okay, maybe that's being a little bit paranoid, but I think it's a good area to be paranoid. So no, I would be very, very wary for national elections. Now, they are used for, so like I voted recently in an election for UCU, which is my trade union, University and Colleges Union. And that was done online. It seems to me less likely that something like that would attract that kind of corruption, if you like, or those problems. But also there's the message that it sends to other countries, which might not be as technically sophisticated as the UK. But also with paper voting, you have a paper trail, literally a paper trail. I mean, remember in the UK at the moment, you don't even have pens in voting booths. It's a pencil on a piece of string is what you vote with. So, I mean, I can see in the chat, Longbow is talking about they should be tied to a credit card or identity of some sort, require authentication protocols. I mean, there's credit cards get cloned, not actually that hard to do. Yeah. We don't have an identity card in the UK. So I think that for the most part, doing stuff online can be safe if you take appropriate precautions. But when the risk of things, if things go wrong, is potentially very high, as in an election, which is, I think, one of the things where you want to be absolutely certain that the system has no fraud, then I would stay away from it, at least for the time being.
Okay, Ziller, do you have anything there?
You're still something from.
You're dealing with a chat room right now.
So yeah, but there's something from a point you made before about the classification of these second order elections, as they're called. And I think there's something about the name that we give it that's very telling about the import we give these elections. And do you think that there's a kind of disproportion to how we're giving these things such less import? You know, we're still electing people to council offices that are making decisions that have drastic influence on our local area, electing people to the European Parliament, which has drastic implications for our place within the European Union. But, you know, we call them second order elections and we deal with them as second order elections. Do you think that's all part of the problem, is that we're not dealing with these things as, you know, as important as a national election should be?
Absolutely. I mean, maybe they're never going to be as important. You know, Parliament is still sovereign, and so on. The last European elections, you had the parties campaigning on national platforms, not what they wanted to happen in Europe. Now, partly this is Britain's strained relationship with the EU. Now, there's been a little bit of a change with European Parliament elections, in that you now have what's happened is a system called Spitzenkandidat, or lead candidate, where basically the party groups within the European Parliament have said that we want to be the head of the Commission if we get the most votes. They were basically asked not to come and campaign in the UK, because doing that and being associated with Europe, even for a European election, would be the kiss of death. So there's, you know, there's particular things there. But yeah, I agree. I'm not sure what the solution is, because for one party I think politics would be better if you said, right, for local elections, our priorities are this, that, and the other. Or for European elections, but it takes a party to do that first, to be willing to go out and do it. But they would probably get hammered at the election. So I'm not sure what the solution is. Just to pick up on Answers in Books question, why is it a pencil and not a pen? I believe it's so you can't put in disappearing ink.
All right.
That's yeah. It's so you can't replace the cartridge in the pen with so that later people's ballots aren't counted.
And it's also a charcoal pencil and not a graphite, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
To stop you rubbing out, like, because I know if you make a mistake, you just put your hand up and. They
physically destroy the old ballot,
yeah, and
will give you a new ballot. So it's that sort of thing is taken quite seriously. But I mean, to take up on Ziller's point again, I think you're absolutely right. But I think part of the problem is, just looking at the UK, the media is national, you know, across the UK for the most part. There is a bit of an independent media in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, obviously slightly different. Even in London, which has some degree of autonomy, the Evening Standard is not really a London paper. It's a national paper that circulates in London and the South East. So, so yeah, I think that's part of the problem as well. Better regional and local media might help things.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, guest makes a point there about local elections. So just to read out what he says for people listening to this later, he says people place little importance on local elections because local authorities have no real powers left.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is as well is that it's the system of local government in the UK is pointlessly complicated and a mess. But I actually disagree with you. Remember that local count. I don't think we don't have enough. I think I would want devolution to English regions, get rid of the two-tier councils and have unitary councils, as I think you do in Wales and Scotland across all of England. But councils are responsible for, I've just pulled up the list on gov.uk, education, transport, planning, which is where you can build houses and so on, fire, public safety, social care, libraries, waste and recycling, trading standards, and then like parish lower councils do allotments, bus shelters, community centres, grants, that sort of thing. So I don't think they have as much power as they should. There is still too much power in Westminster and Whitehall. Local councils are often very much constrained, but I think they do have substantial and substantive powers.
Yeah, I mean, just to use an example here in Manchester, I mean, Manchester City Council has obviously control over Manchester Airport. It's the lead board member, it's the main shareholder of Manchester Airport Group, who have 4 or 5 different airports, country airports around, or airports around the country under its control. They're able to, cart people off their homes, which they have done here to expand the local airport. They have a whole slew of kind of powers at their disposal. To say that they don't have power is a bit.
And also, Manchester's another interesting one, because for some time now you've had, I can't remember what it's actually called now. It used to be called GMPTE, Greater Manchester Passenger Transport Executive, where all of the area, what's it called now? Metro, is it? Where all of the things in Manchester, all of their councils have pooled their transport into one body. And I think Manchester is now getting city region powers, which I think could be. I don't like the way it's being done, but it could be very good.
Yeah.
It seems like in Manchester there's a very good, or I think it's a really good system of trams. They're quite a convenient way of getting around the city and the cities nearby as well. And that's controlled by the city effectively.
Yeah, they just need to start letting dogs on the trams.
Oh, do they not let dogs on the tram?
No, it's expensive, and they don't allow dogs unless it's guard dogs.
Oh, that's a shame. I don't know.
It is a very good system.
Yeah, I mean, when I've been there, it's been a good, good and an efficient and a quick way of getting around the city.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we can get into one of the main things people will be wanting to talk about is we have an election coming up now. It's quite, the one unique thing is this election date was set years in advance, wasn't it? That was part of the result of the LibCon coalition, was it'd be fixed terms. Yeah,
the fixed term Parliament Act 20 something. I forget exactly when that is. 2011, I forget. It used to be that elections could be called by the Prime Minister. I think it's at 3 weeks' notice. They could just say election, and it was completely up to the Prime Minister when to do it. And no less frequently than every 5 years. Partly to make the coalition work, and because actually I think it's probably quite a good thing anyway, because it gave too much power to the Prime Minister, but so that you couldn't just collapse the government and force new elections, or not easily. The Fixed Term Parliament Act was passed, so we've known for some time that this is when the election is going to be. So to be seen how much difference that makes to the outcome of the election, if any. But I think that I actually think fixed term parliaments are a good idea. I'd like them to be more frequent than every 5 years, but
because it's usually 4 to 5 years in the past, the election.
Yeah, I mean, it was Blair came in 97 and then had elections in 2001, 2005. There was talk of, so every 4 years, there was talk of Gordon Brown going to the country early, but effectively he chickened out and went for the whole 5 years because he thought he was going to lose, which would pretty much right. But now that power has been taken away from the Prime Minister, which is I think a good thing.
All right.
So no more Thatcher effect after the Falklands.
Well, yeah, except the election was, there was 79 and 83, the election, so it was more or less the right time. But what it means you wouldn't be able to do is things like Howard Wilson had I should know this, the year when there were 2 elections, I can't remember which year it is, he had a minority government and he called a snap.
74?
Yeah, thinks, yes, it is 74, and he called a snap election in October of 74, and got a majority.
Yeah, because I think probably for the Americans here, can you give a brief rundown to how our election works?
Yeah, so in the US, you have the government is split into the three branches: executive, legislature, and the judiciary. In the UK, we don't quite have that split. The executive is drawn from the legislative, and needs the confidence of the legislative, which means you basically have to have 50% of people in the House of Commons willing to support you to be able to form a government. So there are 650 constituencies across the United Kingdom. Whoever gets the most votes in a constituency, so I think the same as in the US, you just need a plurality of votes, more than anyone else, not necessarily 50%, is the MP for that seat. And then traditionally, whichever party got more than 50% of seats was the no, technically the Queen isn't part of the executive branch. Looking at Malicious Bloke's question, it's the Queen in Parliament, and the difference could be important with what's going on at the moment. But so it used to be that one party would get a majority. That's how people saw it. The last election, no one party had more than 50% of seats, and so you had a coalition formed between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. Where they formed an agreement, and you had Lib Dem and Conservative ministers in the government. The Prime Minister is obviously a Conservative, David Cameron. Nick Clegg, a Liberal, is the Deputy Prime Minister. So that's basically how it works. 650 constituencies. Whoever gets most votes in a constituency wins. There's also the House of Lords, which is basically by appointment. There are still a few hereditaries knocking around, and some of the bishops and archbishops in the Church of England sit there by right. But it's basically by appointment. We still haven't managed to reform it properly. The judiciary, we now have a Supreme Court in the UK. That used to be the House of Lords, but that changed a few years ago.
Yeah, because just to kind of give everyone the lowdown on what the state of play is, because it's actually I think this is the first coalition that's actually gone to term, isn't it? They've survived, which is it? That survived it, yeah.
Apart from during the war.
All right.
And I think did Ramsay MacDonald's last all the way? It certainly lasted for a while, but it's since 1945. Yes, it is.
It's very rare that this happens in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, we've had minority governments. So, like, technically for a while, John Major had a minority government because he had to kick some people out of his party, including Ian Duncan Smith, a future leader of the Conservatives. But basically, it's been a majority. So, one party's had a majority since 45. So yeah, in recent years, it's unusual. You had a brief period when Wilson had a minority government, but snap election and so on. So,
and just to add to that, and quite interestingly, I think we haven't had a prime minister with what you'd term a moral mandate for a long time, have we? Where one of the prime ministers has actually got over 50% of the national vote.
No, I mean, one of the effects of the system we've got is that it massively privileges the Conservatives and the Labour Party. So the Lib Dems, for a long time, had like 5% of seats from 20% of the vote. But then if you got 40% of votes, you would have an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons. So it's quite a disproportionate system. Yeah,
because if you go and look on Wiki and you see the popular vote shares, it's really bizarre, some of the things you can see. Like Tony Blair's last election, 2005, there was only like 1 million votes between Labour and Conservative, wasn't it? It was, but still Labour got the majority.
And I forget, and I don't hold me to this, but I think it's less than 100,000 votes in particular constituencies had gone the other way or gone a different way, he wouldn't have won.
Yeah.
Or Labour wouldn't have won. So it's and And the other thing is a lot of seats are safe.
Yeah.
There's only really about 100 seats that usually decide an election. It's a bit different this time because the Scottish National Party are doing very well, and the Labour Party is doing very badly in Scotland.
Yeah. Because it's, well, just to go back to like in previous elections, I think Lib Dems have actually just to use Scotland as an example, they've had a lower share of popular vote than the SNP, but they can still return twice as many MPs. As you get all these kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I mean the other example at the moment is the Greens. The system we've got at the moment basically rewards concentrated support.
Yeah.
So I mean, so the Lib Dems always did well in the Highlands and Islands, I think.
Yeah.
And so picked up votes in those seats, but the SNP had an amount of support across the whole of Scotland,
yeah,
but didn't have that many places where it was the largest party, which is a strange system that we've got. It's not. I don't think it's a system that's going to be workable. Well, I don't think it's workable now, but I think it is going to have to change.
Yep. So, someone saying, I would recommend another type of system. I like the Holyrood system. I don't know what your thoughts are on our system up here.
You've got it's list PR, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you still have constituencies though.
Yeah, we've got 70 constituencies, and then you group the constituencies into your list areas.
Yeah. I mean, I prefer that to what we've got in the UK. What I would actually like, I would like local government areas and constituencies to be coterminous, to have the same boundaries. We've got this strange, now you get, I think under the proposals, I think it's the London Borough of Southwark is going to have 7 MPs, 2 of whom will have most of it, and then 5 will have little bits of it, which is just bonkers. But then to have multi-member constituencies and elect on single transferable vote, I think there is some logic still to having some sort of regional tie or local tie, so you're electing a particular person, but also to make it so you can still kick the bums out if you want, but also so that where I am, it doesn't really matter how I vote. Jonathan Ginogly is going to get re-elected, the Conservative. My constituency is Huntingdon. To get rid of that, so that so even if there's only one seat realistically up for grabs for all of the other parties, at least there is a contest.
Yeah. So I think, like, as we're carrying on, we should. I mean, we'll have a look at what the current state of play is, because we're coming into this election and it's a very strange one. Even compared, the last one was quite strange as well, but this one is bizarre because even though I think. Would you agree that the LibCon coalition, it's done quite well in terms? It's not had any really huge bumps in the road.
No, lots of people didn't think it would last.
Yeah.
It's lasted. They've got a lot of their coalition agreement they've got through. No, they've done. It's worked, and in a way, I think that might actually be a good thing for politics, that people can see. Well, actually, no, you can have a coalition government. Whether you like what is done or not is a different question, but it can work.
Yeah. And I think the only big political thing coming into this was, of course, the September last year with the Scottish referendum.
Sorry. That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of threw the cat amongst the pigeons up in Scotland, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably going to know better than I do because you're up there, but the referendum was really interesting because you had, obviously, for obvious reasons, a lot of people got involved. But for the most part, from what I can tell, lots of young people who wouldn't normally get involved in politics were getting involved, getting really informed in what was going on. And, politics was something people were sort of discussing. It was much more part of the sort of, I don't know, day-to-day life, at least for a while. But also the principal people campaigning for yes were the SNP, and they seem to have run a blinder. In the end, it was pretty close. I mean, there was a few percent in it. Given that not long before it was a dead cert.
It was 70-30 at one point, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty impressive. but because of the way the SNP campaigned, with a very positive campaign about the future of Scotland, both the message and the style, I think a lot of people have found attractive. I don't think it's any great secret that Labour in Scotland has had quite a few problems over the past few years. Obviously, people don't like negative campaigning, and the No campaign, that's the campaign for Scotland to stay in, was, so far as I could tell, a wholly negative campaign. And people don't like that. And the SNP are reaping the rewards.
Yep. So I think, like I say, I'm trying to follow kind of a similar format to your last 2010 election guide. So I think now we can have a look at each party. So I think we better, like we discussed this before, we'll declare our own interests just because we'll get slated for bias no matter what. So, I mean, I'll put my hand up saying I am campaigning for the SNP up here, and I do have voted for them. And I think, Landon, you're a Labour man, yeah?
I am.
Yep. So I think we'll start off with, well, the biggest party at the moment, the Tories or the Conservatives, what they're looking and hoping to do with this election.
I think the basic message from the Conservatives is, is twofold. One is the main thing, I think, basically is the economy is starting to recover. Keep going with the people who are making it recover is broadly what I think it comes down to. There's various things along that there. So getting rid of the deficit, and then they've got some particular pledges which they're majoring on. I think the basic thing though is economic recovery. That having been said, they also came out with an interesting policy which has caught quite a few eyes, which is right to buy for housing association tenants. Personally, I think it's not a good idea. But so that means Margaret Thatcher brought in a policy called right to buy. If you were in a council house, you could buy that house from the council at a discount. Similar idea now for housing association tenants. We have one of the big problems in the UK at the moment is housing. Housing is expensive. Basically, we don't have enough housing stock, and we don't have enough of the right sort. We don't have enough small units. We don't, for young families and for singles and couples. That is, I think, though, that could be for some people really quite an attractive policy. That is something that I think could encourage people to vote for the Conservatives. One of the issues, the real issues that's new this time around, is that they have to deal with UKIP on the right flank. And so the Conservatives have promised an in-out referendum on membership of the European Union. Basically, that's to try and forestall UKIP. So I think those are the main things. They also came out recently with this thing about £8 billion extra on the NHS. That seems to be just a campaign pledge with very little substance to it.
Okay, and so we'll move over to the next biggest, Labour, your own party. Yeah,
there's okay. Not making any comments about whether it's right or not. There's a narrative that Labour fucked up the economy at the end of their time in power. So Labour's big thing is you can trust us on the economy. This is one of the things that was very important to Labour in '97, and making business trust Labour.
Yeah, because it was always historically the Tories were the economy party, weren't they?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely they were. That, particularly, I mean, the Labour during the '80s was just bonkers in the nut. The 1983 manifesto was described as I think it was Gerald Kaufman described it as the longest suicide note in history. Yeah. But it was calling for, at the time people were talking about like compulsory nationalisation of the 100 largest companies and so on. Not a good way to get the business vote. But the big thing that Labour are going on is financial fiscal responsibility. So they've come up with this thing called the triple lock, which I will look to my notes. And I haven't written down what the triple lock is, but oh no, I have. So everything in the manifesto is funded. There's no unfunded commitments. The deficit will be cut every year, and try to get to no deficit as soon as possible in the next 5 years. So slightly different to the Conservatives, so basically Labour can say we're not going to cut as hard and as fast as the Conservatives will have to. The assessments, the sort of independent assessments that have come out, is that Conservatives are going to have to achieve what they want, are going to have to make further dramatic cuts in government spending. Labour is also traditionally a higher taxing party, so they've basically said no increase on income tax, national insurance, or value-added tax, sales tax effectively, but that there will be a mansion tax. So very expensive properties will attract a property tax, or an extra property tax. Yeah, those are the principal things that Labour are looking at. Basically saying you can trust us on the economy, and we will be responsible, but we're not going to cut as much as the Conservatives have done and would have to do.
Yeah, and the other thing with Labour coming into is they're out of the kind of the main British party, they're the only one with a new leader as well coming into this, I think. Am I right there?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think the Greens have changed leader, but they're not really major. But yeah, this is Ed Miliband's first general election. I hadn't thought of that, to be honest. Yeah,
because there's been quite a bit made in our press about people see David Cameron as a more suitable prime minister. It seems to be polling. I don't know how accurate that is, what's your thoughts about that?
Okay, for a long time I wasn't convinced by Ed. I did actually vote for him. I used both my trade union vote and my party vote to support Ed for leader. And for a while there, I didn't think he was doing that great a job. That having been said, in the past 6 months or so, I think things have been much better. I think the one debate with David Cameron, he probably did rather well. Now, he had the advantage that, as people were saying, that all he had to do was not fall over his shoelaces. But I think he came across, he's coming across better than he has done in the past. I think there is always an advantage to incumbency.
Yeah.
You look prime ministerial by virtue of being the prime minister.
All right. Okay. Sorry, Ziller, do you have something there?
No, I was disagreeing with that last point. I think it has helped a lot of prime ministers kind of regain power in an election before.
Yeah. And so we'll move on to the third party, the Lib Dems.
Yeah, and the Lib Dems are basically trying not to be completely destroyed. Is their aim? I think they are. I think the pretty universally, the polls are showing that they're going to get hammered. There's been some talk even about the leader Nick Clegg losing his seat, because there is a large student vote in Sheffield Hallam, his constituency. I'm looking, if there's a 538, Nate Silver, very well-known pollster or statistician rather. His website is doing the UK election, and there's some great stuff on there at 538.com. The Lib Dems, at the moment, they're being predicted to lose 29 seats, so to go from 56 to 27, which is that's a hammering. And I think people are basically punishing them for going into coalition with the Conservatives. And the issue of tuition fees is still raw. They made a very big deal about this pledge of not voting to increase tuition fees, which they then proceeded to do.
Yeah.
So that's, they've got a lot of problems. So they've, I think one of their things is basically we're the Lib Dems. We're not, the other parties are both too one way or the other. They're getting squeezed in the middle. I'm just putting it up what their main things are. Fairly balance the budget, more taxes on higher earners, increased tax-free allowance, so you'd be able to earn up to 12,500 before you pay tax, and something which is very good in fairness, which is more of a focus on mental health, which I have personal reasons for being interested in on that. But the cost of to the UK economy, I saw a figure, and the cost of poor mental health to the UK economy is ginormous.
Yeah.
Yeah, multiple billions.
And just from lost hours and things like that.
Yeah, from lost hours, basically.
Yeah, because I seen at the last place I worked at, it was very intense work, and some people did suffer. And looking on it, it's something that could have been monitored and helped out a lot at the time. I think that's kind of, and I think sometimes a lot of people see it at their work, but it's sort of reluctant to act on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just go.
Would you? Sorry, can I just quickly ask? Would you say, Landon, that the thing with the Lib Dems at the moment, that what they're focusing on, is it just that they don't want to be usurped as the third party at the moment and taken over by the Greens or UKIP or somebody else coming along, or is it that they're trying to even look further long term than that and stop a growing trend of them just disintegrating over time into becoming nothing?
Well, I think they are going to be the third party. They're going to be the fourth party. The third party is going to be the Scottish National Party. So which is an interesting dynamic, because obviously they only compete in Scotland, the SNP. The polls for the Lib Dems for the past few, 3 or 4 months have been relatively stable, actually, which suggests there's a floor of support that they've reached. So they can't be any lower than this. So, which means they're still relevant. They'll still have a lot of councillors and so on. So I think it may be a case of surviving this and building for the future. See what happens there. I don't know, to be honest. They are going to have a very difficult time.
A tough ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It may be that even like Labour wouldn't want to go in a formal coalition with the Liberal Democrats. I don't think Labour wants to go into a formal coalition with anyone except possibly the SDLP for different reasons. So I think it may be difficult for them. They are the only pro-European or explicitly pro-European party.
Yep.
Labour is pro-European but doesn't talk about it a huge amount, and so they may pick up votes there as well. I just want to flag up for later. Answers in Books asked a real question, interesting question, maybe for a bit later. What do you think about an in-out vote on the EU? Is it going to be damaging to the UK economy? Should we come back to that a bit later?
Yeah, I think we will do.
Okay, cool.
Because I think we'll go on to what the possible outcomes are, and then that can be something to discuss.
Yeah.
We'll just go through the parties. So we'll get into the minor parties, which this time round, thanks to the debates and that, I think they've received a good bit of coverage, which has been good, and a lot of folk have seen what they have to offer. So I think the one party that caught the headlines for the past few years is UKIP. I know I don't think many of our followers will be fans of UKIP. Just what do you think of them and how they're getting into this election?
They're doing well, particularly I think they've got other parties talking about immigration. Their main thing is still Europe officially. They want an in-out referendum on the EU. But they talk more and more about immigration. They are an interesting party because they have a libertarian tendency and they have a very traditional conservative tendency, small c conservative tendency, which is really not libertarian at all. So a lot of things they've said around gay marriage and so on, for some social issues. Obviously, they want to crack down very hard on immigration, and they want an Australian point-style system. I don't think UKIP's manifesto hangs together very well. The Australian, they want to leave the EU completely. Lots of other people do as well. But there's a whole load of secondary issues that come along with that, which I don't think they've really looked at. They are going to have an issue with maintaining party discipline, if you like. You've already seen that with some candidates saying really stupid things and sometimes just incredibly unpleasant things and being deselected as a result.
They are the party of gaffes.
They really are. They really are.
I think someone said to me they're almost the party of those you know, when you've had your family get-togethers, the racist granddad that you had, that would just say these outrageous things over dinner, and you were kind of, yeah, uncomfortable.
Yeah, pretty much. Their vote is, well, I mean, there's a quite well-known book now, Revolt on the Right by Goodwin and Ford. It's a really good book, and I do recommend it. Looking at where they're getting their support from, and it's described. Goodwin and Ford describe it as the left behind, people who feel they have been left behind by, you can call it globalization or the times we live in, or and so on. So people, I think, broadly, who had a certain expectation about how their life was going to develop, and those expectations haven't been met. You might think, oh, well, I'm going to go and, I'll go and work in Dagenham Ford, maybe not the best example, but a particular company, that company probably no longer even exists. So people who haven't benefited or feel particularly hard done by the changes we've had over the past 20, 30 years in the UK. They had a couple of MPs defect to them, Mark Reckless and Douglas Carswell. I think the polling is that Carswell will keep his seat, Reckless won't. The interesting then is South Thanet, where the leader, Nigel Farage, is standing. He said that if he doesn't win, he will resign as leader. The question then is, who becomes the leader? Carswell is the only MP. Another, another. I think part of the problem is they don't have many people who have, or in fact, they don't have anyone who has the recognition of Nigel Farage. And whatever you think of him, he's quite a competent politician. A lot of the people around him, frankly, aren't. I don't think will be able to maintain what Farage has done.
Yeah, because I think it was the Newsnight the other night, they said that in order to win another seat, just due to, like I said, the voting system we have, they would need like 5 million extra votes or so, some crazy figure they need just to get one more seat.
Yeah, and I think the thing to say is whether, I don't like UKIP at all, but for them to be disadvantaged because of the electoral system like that, I think is unfair to them, by actually damaging to our democracy. In the long run, it's not good to have those voices not heard in Parliament.
Yeah. Okay, and probably we'll get into the kind of the national parties, but the Greens is probably the last kind of UK party to look at, who have seen their support grow over the past few years, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they've got their first MP, Caroline Lucas, in Brighton. I can't remember which of the Brighton seats it was. Looks like they've also got so she may keep her seat. It also looks like they've got a chance of picking one up in Bristol. I think it's Bristol West. The Green Party so obviously the environment is very important to the Green Party, but there's a broader narrative about sort of fairness in society. So a lot of what they're doing it seems like a traditional left-wing set of policies. So basically they are opposed completely to austerity. The way we're dealing with it is wrong. They want more investment in the public sector, pay rises and so on, renationalisation of the railways, and they're opposed to any use of the private sector in the National Health Service. So again, this is a party who are not helped by the electoral system that we have. Yeah. They should have more seats than they do. So part of me actually kind of hopes that they do keep, at least one of their seats. They're, partly because it shows the need for electoral change.
And also, I think they're a party that picks up a lot of the youth vote as well. They seem to resonate with a lot of young people, don't they?
They do. They do. I think I'm fairly sure I'm right in saying that they don't want any tuition fees at all. I think that's their policy.
All right.
So they do, but also on lots of things which are more important to young people. They have a lot of attractive policies. They've gay rights and so on. For the Greens is a no-brainer. And then obviously there's a lot of environmental stuff in there. So reducing carbon emissions across the country quite substantially. Sensible policies. There's Natalie Bennett hasn't done as well as she might have done as leader. She had a couple of interviews that were not good for her. I think she did not badly actually in the leaders' debates. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how they do. I'm pretty sure they will get quite significantly fewer seats than they should do under a proportional system.
So we go into the national part, and
I was just going to say, I think they've done fairly well over the past the past few decades, I guess, or past couple of decades, from the time when they were very much seen as a bit of the loony kind of cider party. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, David Icke used to be a Green candidate.
Yeah.
And they were very much lumped in with that kind of weirdy conspiracy theory kind of grouping. And now they've kind of done the best they can to try and build themselves as a legitimate party, haven't they?
They have. I mean, they started off as the Ecology Party, and they've professionalized. I mean, the example, I guess, for a broadly skeptical audience, a lot of their science policies are frankly bonkers in the nut, but they're getting rid of them. They are improving.
Because I think just the other week they ditched their homeopathy supported.
I think so, yeah. But there'll still be people there who buy into it. They're still very dodgy on nuclear. I'm pretty sure they're opposed to nuclear. I understand the argument there. I'm quite pro-nuclear. But you know, there's a lot of stuff in there where the way they go about getting their science policies isn't great. I do wonder, though. I mean, is that as big of an obstacle as it should be, given how the other parties do? I don't know. So, you know, on that, they still have issues. There is still a beardy, weirdy tendency of the Green Party.
All right, and we'll move into the
national. Hang on, there's one more sort of national party, Respect, otherwise known as the George Galloway Ego Project. And I hope he gets destroyed at the elections.
And George Galloway, I think he's holding the record for the amount of people he blocks on Twitter at the moment. Because they say that you haven't made it you have not. That's kind of your first stripe in debating politics, and Twitter is getting blocked by George Galloway, I think. I
haven't been yet. I'm very disappointed. But
you're not trying hard enough.
No, clearly.
It doesn't take much at all. All right. But he's all kinds of words you can use to describe him. All right, so we'll move on to one of the national parties now. Well, the SNP, we touched on this earlier, who are, well, like I say, again, I declare that I am a member, and, you know, we're going in very positive. So we'll just get your take on what's happening up north here. Well, from what you know.
I think that the basic thing, the SNP's main policy is independence for Scotland. Yeah. They're not getting that immediately, so it's more devolution for Scotland. I think the big one is tax. They want more tax raising powers.
Yes. Fiscal autonomy, basically. Yeah,
and then they're going to get some sort of Devo Max settlement. That was the bribe for not voting for independence. I think basically they want a more social democratic setup. So, you know, I think things like prescriptions are free, aren't they, in Scotland, which we have to pay for in England. No, there aren't any tuition fees. You know, it's more tax, more spend.
Yeah. Council tax is frozen here as well.
Yeah, is it? Oh, I didn't know. But okay, that I think the main thing is they're doing very well on the back of the referendum, and the fact that they are generally running a sort of, you know, rather than attacking, they're saying, well, you know, these are the things we want. We want an independent Scotland. We can't have that, so we want more powers to make decisions for ourselves. And people are going, yeah, all right then.
Okay, and what do you make of the new leader, Nicola
Sturgeon?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, she seems to be doing very well. You know, this is the thing. I mean, Alex Salmond, whatever you think of Alex Salmond as a politician, or his policies, rather, he's been incredibly successful and he's a really tough act to follow.
Basically, in Scotland, he's the ultimate Marmite man. There's people who adore him, and then you'll meet someone else who just wanted to punch him, basically.
But he's hung around, and got Scotland this close from independence.
Yeah, because when he took over the SNP, they only had 3 MPs, and then he's taken them when he left. They're now the 3rd biggest in membership in the UK now. It's like 100.
Is it? I don't know.
106,000 members, I think I heard the last time.
And
Which
yeah,
is
they're going to do.
yeah.
But also, as I said, Nicola Sturgeon seems to be doing very well. She did well at the debates.
Yeah.
The SM, I mean, I don't follow Scottish politics as closely, but she seems to be doing. You know, they're clearly going to do very well at these elections,
Yeah.
and she has to take credit for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how things develop. I mean, also she's still going to be at Holyrood, isn't she? She's not.
Yeah, she's the Holyrood. I think the same will happen to Jim Murphy. If he gets re-elected, he'll stand in Holyrood next year. I think it's just the thing that if you're the Scottish leader, you have to be in Holyrood.
Yeah. No, fair enough, really.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I mean, the SNP are the people who are going to win this election if anybody wins it. 'Cause they're going to do very well.
Yeah.
So we will see what happens. See how well the SNP do.
Because I'll just speak for myself here. I'm in Aberdeen South, and Aberdeen's generally a very wealthy area, and it's always been the SNP support is quite low in the wealthier areas of Scotland. And in my canvassing efforts, I have noticed very positive reception here for the SNP. So take from that what you want.
Yeah. I can't comment. I haven't been following it closely enough, but no doubt they're doing well. I'm just looking at the 538 again, and the prediction is to go from 6 seats to 43, which is just stunning.
Yeah, like I said, well, I think someone said that would have just broken Peter Snow's swingometer.
Yeah,
I don't think it could calculate that kind of swing, could it?
No. No, I mean it's remarkable.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll go to the last of the national parties. Plaid, or is that how you pronounce it? Plaid Cymru?
Yeah, Plaid Cymru. The Party of Wales, Welsh National Party, not doing nearly as well as the Scottish Nationalists. I think ultimately because people don't, independence for Scotland is a much more realistic prospect than independence for Wales.
Yeah, there's never been a desire in Wales for independence, has there?
Not in the same way. Not in the same way. Economically, I think perhaps too small. It'll be interesting to see how they do. I think Leanne Wood, did a good job in the debates. She was very clear. I thought that she was going out and basically coming out to bat for Wales, and she's her job is to get the best deal she can for Wales, whatever that happens to be. She wants. I think the basic thing that Plaid want is the same level of devolution as Scotland.
Yeah.
That on the fiscal autonomy, whether the tax base there is big enough, I don't know, but it doesn't strike me as an unreasonable demand. As I said earlier, I think we are too centralised. So, yeah.
We would go to Northern Ireland, but I know from your history you don't know anything about Northern Ireland. I don't either.
Very little. I think the thing to say about Northern Ireland is the parties are all different. They're not well, apart from the Conservatives, the Unionists have a sort of part of the Conservatives now. Sinn Féin don't take their seats if elected because they refuse to swear allegiance to the Queen. The SDLP, Social and Democratic Labour Party, are a sister party to the Labour Party, so it seems very likely that they would want to go with Labour if there was some sort of coalition to be formed. I think they sat with Labour anyway, previously. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think but it's just a very complex situation in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it is, although I think probably fairly static. Things don't change a huge amount. I think the Alliance person will lose their seat, unfortunately. The DUP will do well, and the DUP are pretty awful. But it's still basically voting along ethnic lines in Northern Ireland. But I don't know much about politics there at all.
All right. Okay, so we'll just go on to what the prediction is, because this is what got everyone's guessing this, because there's no real clear picture. It's it is level pegging in the polls, if I remember right. One will kind of go 2 or 3 points clear, and then it settles down again. So,
and they're all within the margin of error.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's you know, who is actually going to get more seats, more share of the vote between Labour and the Conservatives? Too close to call. They're both going to be between 270, 280 seats each, somewhere around there, I should think. So the question is, what coalition can you form? The way it works is the Prime Minister stays as Prime Minister until they lose the confidence of the House of Commons, which basically means the person who gets a first go at forming a coalition are the Conservatives. Realistically, though, I think there's 12 days until Parliament comes back after the election, and everybody will be trying to set things up. I think it's going to be very hard for the Conservatives to get a coalition going. 650 seats. Okay, you take one of those off for the Speaker, and how many the Sinn Féin get, you take those off. But you need sort of 323, somewhere around there, to form the government. The Conservatives and the Lib Dems between them won't be enough. Even if you add in the DUP, it won't be enough. Even if UKIP get 1 or 2, that won't be enough. So it looks I'm not sure what the Conservatives' route to a government is. That doesn't mean it's straightforward for the Labour Party either. I mean, potentially a Labour, depending on exactly how the votes go down, a Labour SNP arrangement might be enough. I don't think it will be a formal coalition as we've had so far. What a government needs to survive is what they call confidence and supply. So people have to, if there's a confidence vote, people have to vote for the government, and they have to be able to get their budget through. Otherwise, they can't spend any money, really. So potentially some sort of arrangement with the SNP, potentially with almost any of the other parties. Lib Dems potentially, then depending on how close it is, Plaid, SDLP, the Greens, who knows?
Yeah.
So it could be it could be quite interesting to see exactly what comes out. My suspicion is that the main part of it will be Labour with support from the SNP plus AN other.
Yeah, because, well, with the SNP situation, we'll say that because historically Scotland's also been a very static kind of electoral map. It usually tends to be a guy will get in, he'll hold it for a few years, it might change. And that's why this is kind of so bizarre what's happening up in Scotland. To put it into like Labour hold huge majorities in a lot of these seats that are projected to fall. We're talking about swings of up to 20% in some places that have been. I think it was Lord Ashcroft. He did a huge. It was 16 constituencies, like right in what we call the Labour heartlands of Glasgow and all that, and
the Central Belt.
Yeah, and it's just unreal what's been projected to happen here.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens on the day.
Yeah.
There are always question marks about polling, but it does seem like the SNP are going to do really very well. I mean, even if they only got a 10% swing, that's still enormous.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Yep.
I mean, it is going to be interesting to see. I mean, we're not going to have a majority again, so nobody will have won a majority in Parliament from 2010 until at least 2020.
Yeah. So
no, hang on, 2005 to 2020.
So it's 15 years without a majority.
Yeah. Like I said, hopefully we will have electoral reform, but
do you think that's quite going to be a long-term thing now, the kind of more politics of negotiation, well, government negotiation then?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that's a bad thing either. I mean, I think one of the issues, when Labour came in 97, They had a whomping great majority, like majority of 179, was it? Just just enormous. And Labour could do anything they wanted. And I'm not sure that was necessarily a healthy situation. Yeah, for any party to have so much untrammeled power.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go back to the question that we said we'd hold on to till now, because it'll be like what the policies are like with all this, because one was the EU referendum. So, let's just say the Tories somehow managed to scrape through. So leaving the EU, what would that be in your view, good or bad?
Catastrophic.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I for all the problems the EU has, I support membership of the EU. One is when, having the referendum now, okay, whether you think overall it would be a good thing or a bad thing to leave Europe, I think what you can't deny is that it would be a shock to the system. And I think when the economy is fragile, that would be very bad. I think even the doubt leading up to a referendum would be bad and would be damaging to the economy. It will affect people's investment decisions, basically. So, I mean, there are, I say, whether you think overall is a good thing or a bad thing, a lot of what goes on in Britain, one way or another, is connected with Europe. There's sort of financial flows one way and another. I mean, from the European Union, and changing that will have dramatic effects. The other thing I'll say is I think the debate quite often is crap. You don't really get people making a positive case for Europe. And also some of the stuff that comes from the no campaigns is factually wrong, just factually wrong. For all the problems the EU has, for all the reform it needs, I think we absolutely should stay in.
Okay, and one of the other, what could be like, and this is bringing the SNP in, is the issue of Trident. So, Adele, what's your views on that?
I'm somewhat conflicted. I don't actually know myself what my position is on Trident. If you'd asked me a few years ago, I guess I'd have said, of course, we should have kept it. I'm not sure.
So just to bring everybody, Trident's the missile system we have to guard the country. Yeah. Yeah,
the nuclear missile submarine-based system.
Yeah.
Obviously, here with the caveat, I only speak for myself and probably not even for myself. So I'm not sure, to be honest, what the right thing to do is there. If we could use it as a bargaining chip to reduce the number of nuclear weapons in the world generally, I think it would be a good thing. If we can get the sort of nuclear missile shield that's been talked about going properly, I think that would be a good thing. But beyond that, the Conservatives certainly wouldn't get rid of Trident. Realistically, I don't think Labour would either. I think there are people within the Labour Party who definitely want to get rid of it, so we definitely want to keep it. It's a lot of jobs involved in it, and I think electorally it could be very difficult unless there is a real change in how people are looking at the country.
So I think it's 30,000 jobs related to it or something. So
yeah, but it depends how far down the supply chain you look.
Yeah.
That these networks go all over the place, and then of course there's obviously our allies have they don't have a say exactly, but we would want to consult with our allies at some length before we did anything like that. NATO and EU and otherwise. So if we were going to do it, I wouldn't I would want it to be as part of a campaign to get rid of nuclear weapons more generally. How realistic that is, I don't know.
Because that does seem to be, like, for a possible SNP Labour pact, that does seem to be one of the thorns in it.
There isn't going to be a coalition.
Well, like a pact or
whatever. Yeah, I think Labour ultimately can say, all right, is this the issue do you want to force another election over this issue? Is this the hill you want to die on? And maybe it is. But I don't think Labour will want to be pushed into it in that way.
Okay, Ziller, you've been very, very quiet. So Ike, we'll bring you in because you had wanted to discuss your own political views with Lando.
Well, no, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. I've just been trying to sort out my family getting dinner on the table.
All right.
Yeah, so just thinking about the nuclear issue. I think that is going to be a bit of a weird one when it does come to Labour and the SNP. If the SNP did try and force a kind of, or suggest that they weren't going to vote for Labour when it comes to the Trident issue, if the other parties tried to take advantage of that, wouldn't they be undermining their own position on Trident as well, though?
The Conservatives wouldn't vote against it. If it came to a vote on Trident in Parliament, then Conservatives and Labour together, I think, would vote to keep it.
Yeah, so I don't think it would be a bit tough for a party to kind of try and knock Labour out on that issue, even if the SNP had a problem with it.
Yeah, I don't think realistically it's gonna happen. And I mean, also, I mean, I think reasonably you could say it's something that you need to have more of a national debate about. And I don't think we've had that. I think we need more of a national debate about the armed forces generally anyway. So yeah, I don't see us getting rid of it, to be honest. Not in this Parliament.
And so,
yeah, it's not something that's going to, even if there was a willingness to do it certainly wouldn't be something that happens overnight.
No, and to be honest, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens, what UKIP do and some of the Conservatives do if there isn't a vote on Europe. It's going to be interesting to see how whatever government it is responds to that, and says no, we don't want a vote on Europe.
Just bringing up the Europe thing, it's known well known that there was a lot of problems in the Scottish referendum when it came to the issue of Europe, because Europe had actually said we won't just allow Scotland into Europe. Once you leave the UK, you've left the Union, you've left Europe. You'd have to go through a process, and we have no guarantee that we'd allow you in. Even a lot of people kind of suggesting that Scotland wouldn't get into Europe. If the UKIP and the Tories manage to swing it so that we have a referendum on Europe, and Britain, for whatever reason, decides to vote to leave Europe, what effect do you think that would have on supporters for or support for another referendum to leave the UK by the SNP?
I think that is the sort of thing where you can't just keep having referenda until you get the right answer.
Yeah.
But
But obviously,
I think a major constitutional change like that, I think, is a reasonable time to say, okay, no, now we want another referendum. And I think that is the sort of thing that might push people to say, actually, no, we don't. We do what we would rather be independent as part of Europe. I find it very hard to believe that the EU wouldn't let Scotland in. They still see the gaps in the Balkans as unfinished business. I find it very hard to believe that they wouldn't let Scotland in. I mean, if the UK was still a member and Scotland left the UK, I'm sure that the UK would whatever it said before, would work with the EU to get them in as quickly as possible, just because just makes life so much easier. Some people would complain about it, the people who've got their own secession issues, Spain being one. Whatever, you just say, well, look, this is what we've done, and they're now an independent country who clearly qualify, clearly meet the Petersburg criteria, already have the acquis communautaire in law. This is not really an issue. If Britain had left, I still think that Scotland would join if they then became independent.
All right, and just to touch on one thing that happened after the last election, obviously part of the coalition deal was the AV vote. Do you see electoral reform being resurrected at any time in the near future, or do you think that's been killed off for a while?
I don't know. I mean, this is the issue. The part of the deal was the Lib Dems got a vote on AV, which really barely an improvement on what we've got. But I did vote yes for it, but meh, not a big improvement. It doesn't seem to be on. People aren't talking about it at the moment. If we have another election where the main parties have disproportionately large numbers of votes, I think it's going to be harder and harder to stop it coming back. We'll see. I mean, personally, I'm very much in favour of some form of proportional system. I think with that, we'll see what happens. I mean, I think things would be better if we had that. It's not going to be it's not going to fix all problems or anything like that, but I think it would at least be a fairer system, and you deal with some of the issues we have at the moment. So I hope it does come back on the agenda, and obviously there'll be people like the Electoral Reform Society who will be pushing it. I hope other parties do as well.
And Answerson Book is asking, how would or should our right to recall work?
Okay, the right to recall is basically that you should be able to get rid of your MP. The proposal that's going around is if they are found to have done something particularly serious, then people can vote to get rid of them. That you can start a petition to have a new election. There's a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, if somebody has been officially censured by Parliament in some way, it seems quite hard to me that they're ever going to get re-elected, or that they would even try or get selected by their party. So I'm not sure what that's doing. If you're going to have a right of recall, just let it be a right of recall. Just say that you need, I don't know, 10% of people, so 7,000 people on average, in a constituency to have a recall vote. I mean, the issue is that people might not vote on a controversial, might vote one way rather than the other on a controversial issue. I think if you're going to have it, just have it. I think the extra step is unnecessary.
Yeah. There is one thing.
The other thing is, I mean, you might be able to force a by-election with that, but if it's because 7,000 people have want to get rid of you, firstly, they might not, because they still think you're going to win anyway. But you can stand without having that official censure from Parliament. If you have done something wrong, people will know about it. So
it's just probably this will just finish out on a somewhat, I don't know what kind of note this will be, but just want to get opinion on Russell Brand and what he's been saying. I can already see the reaction there. His campaign to get people not to vote because he thinks that'll cause a change of some kind.
I think he's a fuckwit. Does that? I mean, I think what he's saying. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think you find that even people within the anarchism circles just think Russell Brand is a fuckwit.
Yeah, he's not an anarchist. And if anarchism is taking about responsibility for your own actions.
Himself as well.
Oh, he's trying to be a bit radical and all that. I mean, I just think he's wrong, badly wrong. Okay, so if and this goes back to the point I made at the beginning. So if you're not going to change the system by voting, how are you going to change it? And do you really think it's likely that you'll get enough people not to vote, or that the people voting will just be old people who tend to vote more? But ultimately, what's the alternative? Are you really advocating some sort of revolution?
Yeah.
He's a fuckwit.
Yeah, because I got a sort of similar comment to that. Like one of the mirrors of the promo, someone was saying, "No, don't vote anyone and send them a real message," and said, "Well,
if you want to send your elected representatives a real message, what you need to do is write to them their name, House of Commons, London SW1A 0AA. That's how you send a message. You literally send a message. Don't bother with a fax because there's or an automated email. Write to their constituency office. Get a campaign going. Get involved.
Well, you can go to the surgery even.
Yeah, even better. MPs aren't the only people. Go and talk to your councillor or your MEP. Get involved in campaigns in your area. stand yourself. But obviously, politics at the moment isn't perfect. Long way from it.
Yeah.
Probably further from perfect, whatever that is, than it has been for some time. But it's not voting thing. I mean, I would like there to be an abstention box on the voting thing, or lots of student unions have it, and it's usually called RON, reopen nominations. And basically, if Ron wins, you do the election again. Find better candidates. Actually, Answers in Books is saying he's had responses from MPs via writetothem.com. Write to Them is a great resource.
Yeah.
But get in touch with them. You'll usually get a response. And the more personalized the letter, more likely you'll get a response. But I mean, I've worked for and with MPs. They do pay attention if they suddenly get a post bag full of people saying, about a particular issue. Okay, makes a difference. It's not always something that's up for vote in Parliament. If there's something going on in the constituency that you're particularly in favour of or particularly strongly against, the MP getting involved can make a real difference. Sorry, just one other thing. There's one time I've not voted, and I deliberately went along and spoilt my ballot, and that was for the Police and Crime Commissioner election. So I have once deliberately spoiled my ballot and just put a big cross through the whole lot. But no, you should go and vote.
Yeah.
Although I think there is a bit of a problem with some kind of apathy within the electoral process, within the democratic process, in which too many people seem to think that politics begins and ends at the ballot box.
Yeah,
I definitely do get that feeling, and I don't mind the idea of people kind of abstaining from voting as long as they're being part of the political process, so much as I have a problem with people who think that I'll just put a tick on the ballot box every 5 years and that's it, I'm done.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely.
Yeah,
and the thing is, not everybody has to be a complete political junkie. You don't have to read all the newspapers every day and follow. A lot of that is ephemeral crap anyway. That's say today's newspapers, tomorrow's fish and chip papers. But to vaguely pay attention to what's going on. Yeah, that's
yeah. Because I can't remember. There was one journalist who said, what makes the papers is the big headline stories, but you don't hear about, the day-to-day work of an MP, the stories you'll hear in surgery, which, I've spoken to plenty, and there's some heartbreaking things they're hearing and they try and fix, but that'll never be heard in the papers. It's, the expenses claim that's a bit, got an extra zero on it or something like that. That's the stuff that's going to make the headlines.
Yeah.
And so, just, I think we'll close it out now. So, just your general...
I was going to say, can I ask just one last question?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we've got time.
Yeah, go ahead. You got a few more minutes, Landon?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Cheers, Landon. I'm just interested if there was one kind of major reform of the democratic process in Britain that you could think you would like to see. Whether it's a separation of powers, whether it's we entirely make the second chamber entirely electoral rather than have any peers. What major political reform would you like to see in Britain if you had to pick one?
You mean apart from me being dictator for life?
Well, you can have that if you want.
I mean, there's a few things. I'd like to see electoral reform, as I've described. I'd like to see something done about the House of Lords. It's not entirely clear to me why we can't abolish it, just not have a second chamber. There'd have to be other reforms to go along with that. Compulsory voting, regionalisation. I think I would probably go for some sort of the English regions to have parliaments, say at least equivalent with at least equivalent powers to the Welsh Assembly, is I think what I would go for. So that a surprising amount of decisions are made in Whitehall and Westminster, and I think we're over centralised. Equally, you have to have, if you're going to have like levels of government below that, they have to be large enough to be meaningful. Cambridgeshire County Council is never going to be able to stand up to the government, realistically. Partly that's to do with the tax base. And tax goes to government and then comes back effectively. But something like that, where they actually had substantive powers over healthcare, transport, education, and so on, but were large enough so they actually had substantial budgets. It seems to have worked well in London. So I think that's what I'd go for.
Cool.
No. Okay, is that everything, Ziller?
Yep, yeah.
And I think we can close it out there. So everybody, very big thanks to LandonCole for coming along. It's been a pleasure speaking to you at last.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right.
It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, and I think next week we're back, Ziller. I can't remember the schedule.
I think you're coming on with Dr. Winters.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. That's for after the election.
Okay.
And I don't know. We might ask you back on if you've got time for.
Oh, I mean, if I'm available, I'd love to.
Yeah.
But she is actually a proper grown-up academic, the sort of person I'd like to be in a few years' time.
All right.
But her research is directly connected to this election, and she is very good. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so Kirsty Winters and hopefully Landon again in a few weeks for an election post-mortem. I'm sure there's going to be plenty to talk about afterwards.
Absolutely.
And Ziller, I think it's next week we're on with Ariel Polyandrani.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you haven't heard of him, he does a very good little blog, Sci-Fi. He's a molecular geneticist, if I remember correct, is he?
Yeah. So lots of biology debunking GMO claims,
and
etc.
He's famous for his complete, utter lack of subtlety in how he deals with pseudoscience. He's a guy we've become a very big fan of on here for basically that. But yeah, that's our next show. We should announce that very soon. And again, everyone, very big thank you to Landon.
My pleasure.
YouTube channel DLandonCole, and I think it's the same on Twitter if you want to follow him.
Yeah.
All right, and this show will be uploaded onto iTunes very soon. And like I say, Landon, I'll send you all the links for it. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy yourselves, and remember to vote if you're in the UK. Please do. It does make a difference.
You have to register by Monday, and you can register at gov.uk.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night, and we'll speak to everyone soon. Bye.
Good night.
Cheers.
It's off. I think that.
Play it.
Nope.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I hope that was